says I'm on. Let me try this. It says Father Nick.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I can hear myself on the public address system. So anyway, welcome back. Heather's getting her mic fitted right at the moment, and she's willing to take some questions and answers. But early in the presentation, I sent Jan Richardson a note saying that Heather was live streaming, and so she was able to join into part of it. So I'm glad, and she sends her very best to Heather and to us. So that's great. So without further ado, Heather, why don't you come around here so you're visible on the mic or on the camera, obviously.
Saturday.
Interested in you having questions and answers for Heather.
Testing.
Specific to the talk or otherwise. So with that, Heather.
I have a question, Heather.
And Laura.
Oh, thank you for the
testing.
mic.
Laura, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. So
Yeah,
my
go ahead.
question is, you said on one of the later slides that it would be time to get personal, but I guess I want to ask a question even more personal. What is it about the Dominican spirituality or the experience of being in this Dominican affiliated school that has affected your spirituality?
And my answer to that is that I feel as a young teacher I was absolutely raised by the Dominican sisters. Notably Sister Mary Peter Travis and Sister Rosemary, who was with us earlier, who worked with us teachers quite often every academic year. Okay. Okay, is that better? As I said, the Dominican sisters truly raised me and many of us legacy teachers over the years and gave us their time and their attention, detailed attention. So I definitely have the sisters to thank, especially Sister Allen, who was my first principal, and have been able to carry those gifts forward through the years. And we're especially grateful to have Sister Jen as our kindergarten partner teacher, so she remains with us. And we do have an affiliation. I mentioned that it was a strong affiliation and also a critical means of support for our school. With the Dominican sisters, we meet for staff days, and we also meet as administrators to benefit from the charism of the sisters. Thank you, Laura.
Heather, when our son Robert was in third grade, you appointed him to play Jesus during a third grade family mass, and the gospel was about the disciples was about the sons of Zebedee asking for places at Jesus' left and right hand. And Robert, standing right up here, came to the disciples when they said, "We have a question," and he said, "What do you want?" And you told me afterward that was so Robert. Now, our son Michael, as a wildland firefighter, I think he thinks in the back of his head, let's be good to one another. As does Michael, as do so many graduates, and Debbie Deneen put together an amazing little blurb or section in the Pass It On newsletter during COVID about 7 Magdalen graduates who were being good to one another as healthcare professionals. I'm just wondering if you can reflect on St. Mary Magdalen and the school motto, where it came from, how you see it as having influenced children over the last 47 years in 3 minutes or fewer.
Thank you, Peter. Many of you know that after every morning prayer experience, we end with our school motto, which goes back to the days of Mitch Caligari. When he first came on board as principal, we mentioned to him that we really need to work on our being good to one another, and that was very true at the time. So in those days also, it was the time of Hill Street Blues, and you may remember that the lieutenant or the sergeant would start every day by, "Let's be careful out there," by saying, as he sent the officers out, he said, "Let's be careful out there." So that's where the "let's be good to one another" came from Mitch. And then we added a year or two later, I think we added the "and pass it on." But I think I'm so grateful, as I mentioned on the one slide, to our associate superintendent for letting us know how important it was to revisit and deepen our knowledge of St. Mary Magdalene in connection with our patron, St. Dominic, because we do say the Dominican blessing every morning at morning prayer also. But I think going back to the touchstone eggs and the missions over the years at St. Mary Magdalene, they're very closely connected to our school mission. And again, the three touchstones: be centered in Christ, speak truth to power. Our kids have never had a problem with that. And turn outward and be willing to proclaim the living Christ to others. And that's, of course, our dream and our hope for every set of 8th graders that graduates from the Magdalen.
I probably shouldn't admit this, but I learned more about the red egg today than I actually knew before your talk, so thank you. And I was just curious, when is there a year in the curriculum where the red egg is taught, or how do the kids learn about the red egg?
Well, you're asking a question that reminds me that we have to be judicious and we have to be careful about what is part of the gospel and what is part of tradition and the lore, what I call the lore and the legend about St. Mary Magdalene's. I think we have a little more latitude at school in the context of our classroom communities and in the context of our morning prayer, for example. We can use our imaginations and we can project based on what we learn in the Gospels. What can we imagine and what can we suggest about St. Mary Magdalene? I believe it, that she took that egg, and I love it that Father Nick took that image for our parish logo. And she truly spoke truth to power when she entered into the palatial room of Tiberius Caesar. And in addition to proclaiming the risen Christ, she also berated the emperor according to tradition about Pontius Pilate. And subsequently, according to tradition, Pontius Pilate was relieved of his governorship. And there are so many layers, Father Nick, I think you would agree, so many layers to that story that I only scratched the surface in my little bit of research that I did, but there's so much more to be mined from those wonderful traditional stories.
It is undoubtedly a legend, but legends are not necessarily just false. This kid a few years ago to me commented about religion in general. He says, "Oh, it's just a big fairy tale." And my response was, there's a lot of truth in fairy tales if you have an open mind. And I think that's where we can come. Mary Magdalene, we know very little about her historically, but she was a woman of means. She apparently was a woman who spoke her mind. We can see that in the gospel. And you can extrapolate an awful lot from just that. I mean, she was an unusual person at that time, and that women really had very little status in society, and yet she seemed to carve out a place for herself. Now, did she go to Rome and debate with Tiberius? Probably not. But she would have if she could. I mean, just given what we know about her personality.
Thank you for using the word extrapolate. I was searching in my brain for, for that word, and it's a wonderful word.
I would like to ask you, as a teacher and as an excellent teacher, have you considered making this presentation to students at various levels? I was thinking how my Magdalen kids would have loved to hear stories about a female saint, but you know, the feminist Shrek sisters, guilty. But I was thinking that it would be well received by students. I was thinking about, could you make the video available? And then I was thinking, no, they got to hear it from you directly. So I know that's a burden on you, but I think it might be one you might carry joyfully. So would you consider that?
Yes, I would. And that seems like a logical next step. And Michelle, definitely, we are going to continue with our students to remind them that St. Mary Magdalene is our patron. We did find when we were in the process of deepening their knowledge about St. Mary Magdalene that they were confused and felt, because we say the Dominican blessing, that St. Dominic was really our school patron. And so luckily we're able to say they are co-patrons, but our school is named for Mary, and of course our church is named for Mary. So yes, that is part of that is a goal for us as a school, as a faculty and staff, to continue clarifying this and deepening the children's knowledge on that. And yes, especially for our girls.
Along with that, a couple times I've run into Magdalene kids at the Solano Stroll, for example, and I've run into children from the School of the Magdalene at the Solano Stroll, and I'll say, oh, I'm a parishioner at St. Mary Magdalene, and there's no recognition in their faces. They're not relating. These are obviously not parishioners' children, but between Magdalene, the School of the Magdalene using the French name, and we're using the English name, I guess maybe a little linguistic translation might be in order too for some of the kids.
Yes, and that's why we have to do that cyclic reminding for the children. And we have the wonderful vehicle of our morning prayer, which is daily. And of course, our religion classes, our religion lessons, where we can do that. And other instances as well. But as we all know, our kids need many reminders.
And this was about a dozen years ago. Maybe things are better now.
I grew up on the East Coast in a suburb of Boston, and I used to go back, of course, visiting family from California, and I was introduced to a friend of my mother's who was very active in the Society of St. Mary Magdalene. And is this an international organization? Do all of us in Berkeley have any direct connections with them? I had never heard of it before, and as I say, this was a number of years ago, and I'm not sure if it's still going strong, but it sounds like something that might be an interesting link, perhaps, for both the parish and the school.
And Mary Lee, there are so many things, as I mentioned, that I don't know about our history, even after having read fairly carefully through the 75-year history. But that group that you mentioned, it would be wonderful to delve into that history more in depth. And also the thing we're always curious about, and Denise mentioned this a little bit ago, how did the origin of the name Mary Magdalene without the final E come about? What was the story behind that? And also the naming of the School of the Magdalene. We think there was a strong neighborhood group of French people at the time in the late 30s that were instrumental in having that name, and there were other schools. There's a school in San Diego, and there's a school up in Portland named the Magdalen as well. So it was the custom, but we would love to know more details about the actual story. And I keep hoping that one day we'll find out from someone who's been around, or perhaps read a letter, or found something in the history that would shed more light on that. But to have a group dedicated to St. Mary Magdalene, a group of women or a group of parishioners, is so fitting, and something that we can hang on to as part of our legacy.
So it comes up on a simple Google search, and the about the St. Mary Magdalene Society, it says, "We are a fellowship of Reformed or Evangelical Catholics within Christ's one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. We dedicate ourselves to supporting each other in the pursuit of holiness, sharing the good news of the free gift of salvation in Jesus Christ, and renewing our distinctive theological and spiritual witness within our ecclesial communities. We take the name of Mary Magdalene in thanksgiving for her biblical status as witness to the resurrection and proto-evangelist, and for the practices of penitence and holiness of life ascribed to her by the tradition of the church." And then it says how to join.
Sacraments instituted by Christ. So it's clearly a Protestant group, which...
They're actually a kind of a split off from Catholicism.
Okay.
They're not Protestant. They were actually among this group that gathered together, not...
Okay, all right.
And we would consider them heretical, I suppose.
There's also a group called Women of the Magdalene East.
I love it that the principal, Kristen, and the theology professor were immediately on their iPhones doing a little piece of research in between. How lucky are we?
We're so lucky to have you, Heather. I can't imagine.
Oh, thank you, Laura.
Without you. Exactly. 47 years and counting.
Thank you.
I got a loud voice. I don't need it. Okay, all righty. So the 820 the Alameda, this is a very superficial question. Is it still standing?
That is a very good question, Patty. I want to go look. I haven't had a chance. I was going to actually drive over there and see if I could find it.
Yeah.
But it's the Gavin House, or it
The
was.
what house?
The Gavin House.
Gavin. Okay.
Gavin, Gavin, is the name of the family. And it's just, Google Satellite.
Yeah, I was going to look it up too, but I thought I just might as well
Yeah.
ask.
But I enjoyed just conjecturing what that Mass 100 years ago must have been like. Imagine Father Driscoll, I think he probably had his hat on, Father Roberto, maybe his habit, but we also have pictures of him in a clerical suit and hat right out of the times. And I do picture him going in with some sort of a Mass kit and vestments over his arm, perhaps, and being welcomed in and ushered in with great hospitality. And imagine doing a Tridentine Mass, a Latin Mass, in a home setting. I like to think that there was a certain intimacy there and a real grace and hospitality to that experience.
On this note, I'd like to encourage everyone to, it's easily downloadable. Kat has it on the website under resources. Barb Gamba's monumental 75-year history of the parish, and she describes in great detail these early masses that were in the homes, and after the ones in the homes, they met in the school. What's the name of the school on Calusa?
Thousand Oaks.
They met in Thousand Oaks School until this building was built. So, but there's lots of interesting details, and all you have to do is just download it from the website.
That's good to know. Mary Hurd was asking about that. So thank you, Kat, and thank you, Laura. That's good to know.
You know, I did hear when I taught here that possibly the naming of the school was the Magdalen was a more gentle way of saying St. Mary Magdalene. And so for the school, they used the Magdalen. Right.
Yes.
Now, whether there's any truth to that, I do not know, but that was kind of the word of mouth when I was teaching here.
Barb Gamba's book, and I remember we get it chapter by chapter. And these past 25 years are missing, right? So, is it? Okay. Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad because I was thinking those little anecdotes, those little bits of humanity that are the threads that kind of weave together the story in Barb's book. But let's, all right. Well, yeah. And maybe just everybody who has these bits of this history to tell, tells them to Deacon Jeff if he's open to that. But just that sense of having that you are there sense of what Barb wrote, I think would do these last 25 years and in the future a good service. So.
That is great news that that's in the works. At school, we have bits and pieces that we try to put together, but it's not the same as doing an integrated historical document like that.
What I love about Barb's book is that she actually talked about what was going on at the time, not just in the school, but in the history. She would always give for each year or decade a background of what was happening in the world, and also the founding of Berkeley. And she described the journey that Father Driscoll would have taken on a ferry to get to San Francisco. He actually lived at St. Dominic's in Oakland and had to commute over here every day on a ferry. Just a wonderful detail that you wouldn't imagine otherwise.
It is quarter of 12. I believe we have a luncheon for our
and for your support, everyone.
Thank you, Heather, and thanks to all of you for gathering.